Hi everyone! Last Epoch releases on the 21st of February, and in preparation for that I want to release a bunch of guides. I've already done some on my YouTube channel, and today I want to talk about skills and how to make a build. So this is a new ARPG coming out, and well, as an ARPG it does have a lot of different build opportunities. Of course, you can go and find a guide for this or that build. If you don't really want to experiment on your own, or you feel like you might not understand enough to actually make a viable build. However, the game is fairly easy, I would say, and it doesn't really take all too much to kind of get through the game and make some kind of viable build. Of course, some are better than others, and it also depends on like how well you make your build. But in the grand scheme of things, the game really encourages experimentation and trying out new things all the time. So in this video, I want to go through that. I want to show you how you can choose a class, a mastery, and then also do combinations with your skills in order to create a functional build. So first things first is when you start a fresh character, you can select one of the 5 classes, and each of those classes has 3 subclasses. For example, here this is a rogue, the base class, and then it has 3 masteries: the blade dancer, the marksman, and the falconer, which right now in the live client is not available yet. But when the game comes out, this is the final mastery that the rogue will have. So the way this works is that you play the rogue first until at some point in the campaign, fairly early, you unlock the masteries and can choose one of them permanently. And it's basically a subclass that you specialize into, unlocking extra skills. So you have the base skills of the class, and then you have your masteries skills as well. So I'll show you that in game. This is, for example, a level 94 blade dancer that I have already. This is a rogue that I specialized into a blade dancer, giving me those extra abilities. So that is a permanent choice, and this is already something that kind of dictates the builds you can make. And obviously these masteries are somewhat flavorful. So for example, there's the Sentinel, and it has like Paladin and the Void Knight. So one is like more holy themed, one is more void themed. And then, you know, like a more like physical themed, I don't know the name right now. And for example, here on the rogue, you have the marksman as a bow character, you have the falconer that's going to have like the falcon pet, and then you have the blade dancer that's like, you know, some like agile, like, you know, fighting melee character basically. And likewise for the other classes, you have these masteries that, you know, kind of, you know, dictate the whole theme of what you can do with that mastery. And then it comes down to choosing the right skills. So you have 5 skill slots available. So your skill bar looks like this. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the right click, or you can also, you know, reassign it whatever you want. And then left click is usually like the move only button. So this is the entire skill bar. And here are your specializations as well. So what you can do is you can build a skill tree for each of those skills. So when you click on them, this is, for example, my main attack here. This is the Shadow Cascade. This is a Blade Dancer specific attack. And each of those skills has a skill tree. So it looks like this. And you have different choices, and different, you know, skills have different looking skill trees. And you see here that you can specialize up to 20 points into each of those abilities. So this is really cool to customize your build, and it allows you to actually completely change how a certain skill works, make it stronger, transform, for example, the damage type into another damage type. You can make an attack skill into a cooldown, these kind of things. So there are pretty crazy combinations of and pretty drastic changes you can make to individual skills in order to effectively transform it into something entirely different. Just as an example that I can show on my build here right now is shurikens. So usually shurikens is a very simple attack. It just says throw 3 shurikens at once. So you just like throw them out in a cone in front of you. And I have actually changed it to spin around me. This is one of the points that you can spec into. It is here, it's called Blade Shield. And now it says you summon your shurikens and your shield around you for 3 seconds. And this is why they spin around me like this, for example. So this is one of those cases, and now I can actually use this as kind of like a buff skill instead of an attack skill, for example, because here I get extra armor while I have this shuriken shield around me. And in fact, this combos with my other skill. So for example, I have shift, which is just a pretty straightforward mobility skill. Every class has like one of these, for example. And yeah, it just like, you know, dashes forward. But you see, I have like one of these shadow cascades that happen automatically when I shift. This is also part of the skill tree there. And likewise, I also automatically summon shurikens. So this is part of the shifts skill tree. So we can search this here. We have a search bar, and you see this up here. So it says you throw shurikens at nearby enemies after shifting. So instead of just doing the shift and moving my character, I also automatically throw the shurikens. And this combines with this blade shield. So this is one of those examples where you can actually make a combo between skills as well. But ultimately, you want to look at each skill individually and just kind of figure out, okay, what is going to be your main skill. In my case, is the Shadow Cascade. It's like this big attack here. So it's just like, kind of like a one whirl AoE around me. But for example, there's also this other attack here, Synchronized Strike, and it summons these shadows. And these shadows can use the same attack as well in this build, for example. So I actually get 5 hits instead of just 1. And I can also start investing into shadows to deal more damage. So these shadows actually deal much more damage than my own attack. And this is how I actually deal damage. So I always do this combo of, summoning the shadows and then doing the combo attack where they all do the Shadow Cascade. So how do you actually go about making your own build in that case? Well, it really is up to you, because as I said, there is a lot of really viable potential on a lot of these skills, and you don't have to play a certain skill a certain way. Another example could be, for example, the Acid Flask. So this does kind of what you expect. It just throws like basically a concoction, like in a parabolic trajectory, and then it lands on the ground. It's like a ground AoE attack basically, and it produces like a poison explosion, and that poison explosion can like dot up enemies. But for example, as well, in this case, you can make it a fire explosion. So you can make it an explosive flask that deals fire damage, and instead of like applying a dot that is poison, it now just doesn't poison anymore, but it has more hit damage. So suddenly this poison dot spell becomes actually a hit spell, and then this can start critting. And like this, you can start scaling crit chance and crit damage. For example, you can start scaling fire damage, and you can make something completely different out of this. Or for example, here you can actually throw multiple flasks. So instead of only one of those acid flasks, you can throw 3 of them, but it costs more mana in this case. And likewise here, you can actually make them like, throw in like a little area. So you have like a bit of area coverage, and it's easier to hit targets. And similarly, for example, down here, you can actually give this thing a cooldown. So here you can throw an acid flask on the ground, and then it creates a poison pool. So this poison pool then stacks up poison on the enemies, and it can do some other debuffs. You can make them last longer, and then it has like this other debuff here. So you can like start investing more into this, and suddenly this acid flask, instead of being like a spammable attack, becomes a cooldown skill that you want to use as a support tool for example, another skill. So you just throw it on the boss or something, and then you use something else to actually attack more frequently. Now, it's important to try to understand what actually makes a skill work and how they scale though. So scaling is everything in ARPGs. How do you actually boost a skill? Well, that is actually fairly simple. So when you look at this, if you look at the skill here, for example, my Shadow Cascade is my main attack, and it has at the bottom of the tooltip, it says the scaling tags. So it says physical, melee, area, and dexterity. And in fact, you can actually hold Alt, and it gives you a bit more information there as well. So for example, it says dexterity scaling is 4% increased damage per point. So right now my character has 28 dexterity, for example. So I get a bunch of extra damage there. And it also says that added damage applies at 200% effectiveness. So this depends on the skill. So for example, skills that hit extremely fast, or like have like multi-hit abilities or something like that, they might get less added effectiveness. So for example, my sword here says on the top 50 melee damage, and then it says one of the affixes there plus 26% melee physical damage. So this is the added damage, and if this says 200%, well, I get double of that. So I get actually 152 on this one, for example. So this is generally how most of these builds work, but not every skill scales exactly the same way with the same tags. So if you look at this here, for example, I mentioned the Shadow Cascade, it has this physical, melee, etc. And then we have, for example, the shurikens here, and it also says physical. So this is baseline a physical attack. You can scale physical damage. But then it also has throwing attack, for example. And throwing attacks work a bit in a special way. They have like their own like throwing damage, added damage basically. So it doesn't, for example, scale with your weapons. So this like, you know, melee physical damage does not actually apply to throwing attacks, but instead you have to try to find other ways to scale it. And likewise, we have minions. So for example, the ballista. So this is like one thing that I have access to on the rogue. It just summons like this auto turret here, and it starts shooting at enemies. And here you also see the scaling tags. It says minion and dexterity. And then again, you can hold alt. You can see actually, you know, what it does. But this, for example, you know, scales with minion damage. So minions in general do not scale with the stats of your character, but instead they have their own like minion specific modifiers. So you can find items that have plus minion damage. And sometimes, for example, there are also these skill tree specific nodes where it says that it may scale with your own character's damage or so. So this exists, but in general, this, you know, minions are a bit separate. And the typical way to make a build in Last Epoch, and most likely in most ARPGs, is that you usually have like one main attack and then a bunch of like supporting skills and mobility skills and these kind of things. So you can kind of see the combo coming together here, I guess, on my build. So we have our right click here, the Shadow Cascade, and usually I use it together with the Synchronized Strike, my number one, to create those extra shadows. So this is how I do like a massive nuke because I have multiple hits. Then we have the Shift, it's just a mobility skill. And we have the shurikens here. The shurikens, they don't actually need to be on the bar. I could actually take them off the bar if I wanted. So we can just do this, and I don't actually ever press them, but instead I just trigger them from the shift. And like this, I have this extra armor shield, for example. And then whenever I'm close to enemies, they start hitting stuff. They can apply like on hit effects and stuff like that as well. So for example, again, my weapon here, it has the chance to apply frailty on melee hit. This is a debuff that reduces monster damage. So this is kind of nice, well, just like walking around, and even without me using my main attack, I can actually apply these kind of things just running around with a shuriken around me. But since I specialize into this skill, and there's not really that much point but in using another skill on the bar that I didn't specialize in, I just kept it on the bar because sometimes I can like precast it on a boss fight, for example. So basically we just put this here, and sometimes when there's like, you know, a boss spawn animation, I just expand this a little bit. And here we go. But in the end, I basically have this one main attack and a bunch of supporting stuff. There are certainly builds where you can also have like, you know, multiple damage skills, maybe like one more single target, one more AoE. That is also possible, but in the grand scheme of things, as I had described, for example, with the acid flask, you can make it into a cooldown. You can just throw this, like, for example, once in every 10 seconds or something, apply a bunch of debuffs. Or, for example, the synchronized strike can be like a combo tool. And likewise, you can do the same thing with basically anything else in the game. Now, one thing is important to note here is that you unlock some of these skills over time. So here I'm a very high level rogue, so I have pretty much everything unlocked. But you can see here there are these numbers, and this is also locked behind the marksman tree, for example. So when you make a character and then you specialize into one of the masteries, you can spend points into that mastery's talent tree. So talking about the talent tree here real quick, but you have your base tree from your base class, and then you have these three separate mastery trees. But you can only spec up to half of a mastery's tree that you have not specialized in. So you see here, I'm a blade dancer. I can go all the way to the right. It goes from left to right. And on a marksman, I can only go to the middle. So this means that if I'm a blade dancer, I can get access to multi-shot and dark quiver if I spend 5 points or 15 points, but I cannot get access to hail of arrows, because for this I need to have marksman level 30. And similarly, each of the masteries also has their own kind of signature spell that you just unlock when you play that mastery. So for example here, being a blade dancer, you just get dancing strikes as another option, which right now I'm not using in my build, but I could only use this if I'm a blade dancer. And likewise here, for example, on the marksman, you have detonating arrow. This is just something you unlock as soon as you choose that mastery. So there are some limitations depending on which mastery you choose. And as I mentioned, you cannot undo that choice on a character, but you can undo everything else. So in general, it is fairly easy to experiment, because what you can do is you can literally just press on Respec here and then start removing points. So the way this works is that you level up skills as you play the game and you defeat monsters, and then you get up to level 20. You can go higher than that with for example, rolls on your items. Like I have a chest piece right now that gives me +3 to Shadow Cascade here. This is very powerful, especially for your main skills. So this is level 23 and it allows me to spend more points. But for example, you can also respec them. So you just remove them here and then I can take out 1 point. I can take 1 point again. And then I stop respecing and now this is de-leveled to level 18. And now as soon as I go play the game again, I will level this thing up again to 20. And well, in the late game that goes extremely fast. It's like, you know, a matter of minutes basically to get this back up and running. You have like accelerated XP gain. So I believe as soon as you have leveled it once to a certain level, you have acceleration until that level again. And since I've maxed out everything already, it is very easy to get that again. So you can just like, you know, swap these points around pretty freely and try stuff out even relatively early in the game and just see what works best for you. And likewise with the talent system. So you have these here, or it's called passes. So there's nothing like, you know, really skill specific here most of the time, but you get a lot of different stats. Like for example, here's dexterity and glancing blow chance. Here's increased melee damage. Here's flat damage. There's like a bunch of other triggers maybe sometimes. Here's like some things I can trigger to get these perfection stacks and to give me armor, for example. But ultimately, this is mostly just to kind of like min-max and try to scale your damage and your defenses a little bit. But also here, you can just talk to this friendly NPC in town, and then you can start respecking. So I can just take out a point. It costs a little bit of gold, which is a pretty trivial cost to be fair. And you can just start taking out points here. And unlike the skills, you don't actually need to go and level up again. So you don't de-level your character. So you can just take those points and put them right back in if you want. So like this, you can always, you know, start experimenting, see what works. You can also, for example, put a point into one of those passes to see how much it actually impacts the damage of your character. So you can always look at, for example, here your damage per second value, and you can see like how much does it rise or, you know, reduce when you do a certain change. Now, I wouldn't necessarily trust this number here as like your DPS, but seeing the relative changes at least is definitely helpful because you know, okay, you know, I added 1 dexterity and that gave me like +3% damage. And maybe I can add, you know, 1 flat damage and that is actually 5% or something like that. So like this, you can at least get a bit of a feeling of how much a certain change impacts your build. And without going too much into the details of how items work in this game right now, I've already talked about crafting in a separate video, but items are obviously really important and the one thing to strive for and to try to chase and try to perfect as you level up your character and as you maximize your gear and your build. So obviously you want to have items that go with the kind of build that you're making. So first come the skills and then the talents, but then also the items. And this is something that you can continuously work and improve on. So in my case, for example, well, we have this Blade Dancer, we have the Shadow Cascade, and you see here the scaling tags, melee, physical, area, dexterity. So those are the things that you're looking for on your items as well. And you see here, for example, this sword, it has melee physical damage, and it has, for example, crit chance. I'm trying to get 100% crit chance of this thing. And well, here's another sword where I have increased physical damage. Well, almost all of my damage is physical, so this is extremely valuable. And likewise, we have stuff like crit chance and crit multiplier. So also without going into the details of how all that stuff works, it is pretty obvious that this is something that I want to have as a Blade Dancer. So basically just trying to find those stats that would actually work with your setup. And again, you can always check it out. You can look at what actually changes on your tooltip. So even though this is not exactly like an accurate number in terms of, you know, absolute values, how much DPS I'm doing, you can see the change when I unequip this item. And you see here, this helm, for example, gives me roughly plus 10% or so, or plus 12% DPS, because it has this plus 50% melee damage. And it also has this increased damage of skills used by shadows, which again, you know, I have this combo here, and then those shadows have extra damage. This is something I talked about earlier. And then most of the time you try to stack up a bunch of extra defense as well on your items. So you see here I have a bunch of life, I have a bunch of resists, and here's more life and more resists, a bit of armor and these kind of things. And this is how you round out your build in the end, basically. And if you look at these items, when you hold Alt, you can see the prefixes and the suffixes. So every item can have 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes. Now there can be a 5th stat called a sealed affix, but that is, you know, a bit more advanced. But there is a way to get a 5th affix, but ultimately you have prefixes that are usually more offensive oriented, and then you have suffixes that are usually more defensive. So you have kind of like a combo of both on each item. See here there is 2 offensive and 2 defensive passives, and similar here we have the 2 offensive prefixes. We have then the resistance and the endurance threshold, so this is the defensive stuff, and similar here. So there's resistances and the frailty, which is this damage reduction proc. If you want to learn more about the items, then I recommend to go watch my crafting video. I just made one like the other day, talking about how you actually make these items, what you can do, and how the whole forge works and all that stuff, because this is something really integral to Last Epoch and how you actually play the game and progress your character in a late game in particular. But for the most part, if you want to try to make your own build, well, for the most part, you just go and select a skill that you like, and then you try to start scaling it into a certain direction. You try to find synergies and try to supplement it with other supporting skills like these, and look around. The cool thing is also that, well, you have these tools that make it very easy to actually understand how skills work. So as long as you see what the base skill does, you can just see usually like the quick tooltip, or you can just put it on your bar. You can just drag it over here and try it out, and you see, okay, this is the acid flask. It looks like this, and then you can kind of get an understanding of what the skill actually does. And you can also look at the skill trees. And there is, first of all, the top tooltip where it says in more detail what actually happens. But you can also see on the bottom, there's always like these this 1 or 2 lines of like condensed information. So you see this here. So for example, shatter, and it says, okay, puncture has a chance to shred enemy armor, and armor shred by puncture has increased effect, etc. But well, once you actually understand what these things do and what armor shred is, you can just look at the bottom, and it says literally just, in one line, armor shred chance plus 10%, armor shred effect plus 10%. And similar, you can, look around and you see here immobilize on hit. You see here hit damage plus 5%. You see here bleed chance becomes poison chance, and so on. So once you actually kind of understand the baseline of the game, you actually can look around these skill trees extremely fast and efficiently to kind of look for synergies, kind of look for stuff that you want to do. Or for example, let's say you want to make like a really heavy poison themed rogue, for example. You can literally just type poison and it will actually highlight everything here, and then you can immediately see, okay, here we convert bleed to poison chance, and here we get extra poison chance, and here we convert poison to bleed chance. So obviously these are kind of like exclusive, but likewise you can start looking for some other options here. So for example, here is poison stuff. And you can actually see where are those synergies without necessarily knowing every single node by heart on every single skill. And because the respecking is so easily, it's just no problem at all to respec a little bit. And yeah, okay, if you respec, your skill will be a little bit lower level momentarily until you catch up again. But the catching up happens fairly quickly, even early on in the game. And you always can swap stuff around that you don't like. You can de-specialize skills as well. So if you press on respec, you can also just completely remove that skill and open up one of the 5 slots on the top for another specialization for another skill. So there's really nothing to worry about. Now the last important thing that goes into making your own build are the idols. If you have played Diablo 2, then you will know charms, and this is exactly what these idols are. They just have their own separate inventory here, so you don't clutter your main inventory, and you only have a limited space for them. So you see this here. So as you play through the campaign, you're going to do some of those quests and unlock more of these slots, and then you can fill this up with all of these idols. These are just random drops. They cannot be altered or crafted or anything, and you just try to find stuff that kind of works with your build, similar to how you did it with the rest of your gear. So here I'm trying to stack armor and life and crit and some resistances that I might lack. They're actually very good tools to kind of fill in the gaps for your resistances. For example, here you see I'm a bit undercapped on physical and cold and so on, and the necrotic is super low. So this would be one of those cases where, while it's not that easy to change the rest of your items necessarily in the late game, you can swap in a few of those idols and just try to fill in the holes basically that you have in your build. But this is the last thing that goes in there. They're kind of some joker pieces. I take them as that, and they really help you out in the end. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So I just tried to explain how we can actually experiment, how you can make your own builds, Personally, I find it very fun in ARPGs. I do this all the time. I start, experimenting. I make builds, I make guides, etc. This is what I love doing. And in Last Epoch, it's pretty much easier than in almost any other game, I think, to try to make your own combos work, to try to make your own fancy setup. And there are so many different combinations, even for a single skill, with all these different choices you can put on each of those skill trees, and then those combinations of different skills and so on. I guess you can see where this is going. So I hope that this helped you to understand a bit better how the skill system works, how you can make a build. I wish you good luck when Last Epoch comes out. Obviously, I'll be blasting, and I have some more video guides for you coming out very soon. So stay tuned. I hope you liked this video, and see you guys next time.